teacher, and I'm also studying cognitive neuroscience at Harvard, and I'm a teaching assistant in their mind, brain health, and education course. So I know a lot about Montessori, but I also know a lot. I'm learning more about the brain, and so I want to share with you some of the really important information that we have about the brain. Okay, so we'll start. Oh, like this. And so every one of us is born with about 100 billion neurons. We're born with 100 billion neurons. We should get a warning sign at the hospital. Warning! Contains 100 billion neurons. Right now in your brain, unless you've done a lot of alcohol or had some really difficult disease, you have about 100 billion neurons. You still have it. So here's how it looks for us when we're born. Here's your little 1-month-old brain. Do you see all these little black circles there? Those are the nuclei of the neurons. Neurons is just a word for brain cells. Okay? So those little black circles are the center of the cell. These skinny lines are the connections. So do you see in the 6-year-old brain, there's about the same number of black circles? But what's different? Way more skinny lines, way more connections. So that's what life does to us. We grow connections based on what we do and based on what we experience. Now when you hear those terrible stories sometimes about a child who's lost in the closet or some terrible thing like that, their 6-year-old brain is going to look more like this. They're not going to have those strong connections. Totally based on what happens to us in life. And you can think about this. Think about if you're driving somewhere, right? You learn by doing. How do we grow these connections based on what we do? So if you're the driver and you're going to a new place, or if you're sitting as a passenger and you're going to a new place, who's going to remember how to drive home? Drive. That's right. That's right. Because we have to actually do it, put our attention on it. If we want to learn it. That's easy, right? So here's what happens next. So here's your baby brain, all right? And here's your brain at 7. Look at how crowded it is with connections. And then here it is at age 15. What happened? There's fewer connections. We've lost connections. This is a normal process. It's actually healthy. It's called neural pruning. But it is like we use it or we lose it. And so what happens is right here, let me tell you a little bit more about that. In this 7-year-old brain, it's very similar in your kindergartners. You try to get from point A to point B, right, to process your information. And it's like a jungle. It's like all these overgrown paths, right? How are you going to get there? You know, it's like you're hacking your trail through with a machete or something. It's hard. It takes forever. And this is why it takes them forever to do it. Right? So you ask them, okay, put on the shoe. Put on the shoe, and you're waiting, and they don't do it. That's why. It's not because they're slow. It's not because they have any difficulties. It's because of the state of the brain at that age. Okay? Does that make sense? So for us, like if we're reading with them and we say, do you know any sounds on this page? What sounds do you see? And we're waiting. We're like, no, really. Just wait a little bit longer. And test this for yourself at home and see what happens. You're about to say it again. You're about to repeat yourself. Try waiting a little bit longer. And see, they'll usually get there. They heard us the first time, okay? All right. But then, whenever we practice and do again and again and again, we get good at it. Those are the connections we keep. And that's good, because then this 15-year-old brain is like a superhighway. It's full of superhighways, not these overgrown paths. All right? So we can process our information much better. So when they say practice makes permanent, practice makes perfect, they actually should say practice makes permanent. Whatever we do again and again and again, we get good at. Whatever we do again and again, we get good at. Even if we get really good at eating cookies every day, right? Our brain's going to get strong connections for eating cookies every day. Your brain's going to want to do it again and again and again. So be aware of that. Anything that you want to do a lot or skillfully, notice what you're doing with your children repeatedly. Come join us. Come join us. Do you know what class they're in? Yeah. Thank you so much. Your children can go to their teacher?
Well, he's with me.
Oh, great. Well, come join us. I'll give you some papers when we I have some crayons and some things. What color do you think? Here, pass that to you. we're talking a little bit about the brain, and I'll talk more about logistics after. Okay? All right. Oh, and by the way, you should be thinking I'm smarter now because I showed you a picture of the brain, and research says that if you show anybody a picture of the brain, they think you're smarter. So don't be duped. Don't be duped. Okay. All right, so practice makes permanent. All right, so whatever we need to do it again and again, and you'll get a strong connections for it. So here's an example of how we can do this with our children at home to help them grow really strong connections. Here's this great dad, and he's got this bag of groceries on the floor, so that his little one can take the things out and put them away in the low part of the fridge. If there's something that goes up high, the little one can hand it to his dad, and his dad can put it up high. There's a lot of things in the house that we can do like this to make it accessible for the children, and that is really important for them to grow really strong brain connections, all these daily activities that we do and that they're interested in doing with us at this age. It helps the brain develop strongly. One example is in the closet in their bedroom, move the pole down to their height so that they can hang up their clothes in there. Another example is in the kitchen, to put the dishes and glasses in the low bottom cabinet instead of the top cabinet, so that they can help us put the dishes away, set the table, bring us a treat, right? And don't worry that it's glass and ceramic. Don't put your best china in the first time. But glass and ceramic is fine because they will break usually one or two things. But then they learn, oh, this is glass, I have to be careful. And what that teaches them, without us saying, it's glass, be careful, which isn't as effective, that's like being a passenger in the car, it teaches them to pay attention. Their hand gets coordinated with their mind. They start to learn how to control their body. Oh, there's a consequence if I behave this way, and it trains the attention. Intelligence is very much about training the attention to be where you want it to be. Does that make sense? Okay, it sounds like a radical act, but it's really okay. We learn from each other. We learn by imitation. This is two different kids. They're not twins. It's not a mirror. They're just doing what the other's doing. And so think about, this is about mirror neurons. Have you heard of mirror neurons? They're very cool. So think about what happens to you when you hear somebody in the other room open a bag of potato chips. What happens? You start to salivate, right? Yeah, your body, in your brain, you're already eating the chips, right? You're there. Those are your mirror neurons. This is normal. What happens to us when we perceive that somebody else is experiencing something, our brain experiences it as if we were experiencing it. So this is huge. Now think about that. It means, of course, that we want to be role models. We want to be what we want our children to be instead of just telling them what to be. We actually want to be it. But it also really has implications for what they watch. Screens, when they see violence on TV, they experience as if it's really happening. So it's really traumatic. All right, so that brings me to the next point, which is pretty big. It's about stress. So here's the brain of a healthy 3-year-old, and here's the brain of a 3-year-old who experienced extreme neglect, really bad stress in the first 3 years of life. Do you see the difference in the brain? That difficult experience dramatically changed the way the brain formed. Okay, dramatically. This is how much experience shapes our brain. This is the effect of it. So, that's hard, huh? And this is the brain we have forever, right? So, this is how important it is not to have stress in your children's lives. Stress for the young brain is toxic. Under age 6, the brain is in a unique stage of development. The most important time of brain development is before age 6. This is when these dramatic experiences have the most influence on the brain's form. But when they have a healthy environment, learning's really effortless. And it's extraordinary with the brain that you see them absorbing information in the brain. So that's great. So let me just tell you a little bit more about stress though. Oh, I gave away the punchline. My slides are backwards. So here's your brain. See these colored lines? These are the connections, the skinny lines that I showed you earlier. So everybody, can you feel the base of your skull right back there? The top of your spinal cord? Do you feel that? That's your brain stem. And that's this part right here. That's the part of our brain that deals with making sure we're breathing, making sure our heart's beating, okay? Then you move up, and in the middle of the brain, right, like straight back behind your nose, it's the limbic system. And that has to do with if we're safe, if we're scared, it's the fight or flight responses there in the middle. Out on the edge, go up like this all around your head. All around the head. Like the skin on a grape, it's called the cortex. That's where we actually think. That's where our decision making happens, okay? So breathing, safe, thinking. That's the order, pretty much. Here's what happens when you're scared or stressed. All your brain activity is focused in the limbic system. It's not getting out to the cortex. It's all in the lower brain areas. Yeah. So what does that mean? What does that mean? That means what happens. Think about if your boss yells at you. I'm going to be loud for a minute. Don't worry, I'm just pretending. You messed up! Right? Your boss does that to you. What happens to you? You kind of like flinch, right? You're like, oh no, okay. And then they ask you, what are you going to do about it? And can you answer them? You're like, well, something comes out, but who knows what comes out, right? That's because you literally can't access your thinking part of your brain when you have a stress response. That makes sense. We've all felt that, right? So what does this mean for our children? First of all, if we have to correct them, we can't expect to teach them. That's not the teachable moment, right? So let's say we have to be firm and clear with them. If they hit another child, say, you have to say, no, you may not hit, and move them away from that situation. But that's not the moment when we can teach them what to do instead. Instead, maybe later that afternoon, maybe the next day, we could say, remember how you hit Kevin yesterday? I think it's because he took that toy that you wanted to turn with. Next time you could say, Kevin, I want to turn with that when you're done instead of hitting him. It's like you can teach them later, but not in the moment that they're corrected. Does that make sense to everybody? This also explains why timeouts work. So you're all stressed. You need time for your brain to get back connected to the cortex, right? Sitting down, they recommend 1 minute per year of age, and that's about enough time to get them to settle back down. Now for me, I can't have 44 minutes. I would like it, but I can't have it. So it's good for grown-ups too, though. We have the same stress response. Yeah, you want longer. We have the same stress response, so it's really good for us to take time out for us too, because we don't want to lose it on the kids and do this, right? Okay, you're all good with that. All right, let me tell you another thing that's really helpful with stress is sleep. Exercise. Exercise. Have you ever been in a situation where it's really kind of noisy and loud and lots of people around and the kids, you can see them getting a little antsy and frenzied? They're having a stress response, okay? One thing that can help them settle is if you can get them to move sometimes in that minute. Maybe there's a set of stairs, or like walk up and down the stairs 5 times or something like that. That can be very helpful for them to settle. In the bigger picture, a whole hour every day of sweaty, heavy breathing play is what we want for kids. When they get that, actually when we get that too, our brains grow bigger in areas that have to do with memory and innovative, flexible thinking. So an hour of exercise a day will actually make us smarter, our kids and even as adults. That improves their health. The other thing it really helps with is sleep. So a tired child is a happy child, right? A good child, right? Get them to sleep really well if they have enough exercise. There's a lot of data on the implications of sleep deprivation in children whose growing body weight. And what you see is that children who have chronic sleep deprivation, they have trouble with their attention, they have mood disorders like irritability and short temper, and they have trouble learning in school. So let me ask you, and don't say the answer out loud, just think it in your head. How many hours a day of sleep does your 5-year-old need? Don't say it out loud. Yeah. Would be the right amount. Not what they get. What they need. Don't say it out loud. Okay. 11 to 13 hours. 11 to 13, something 13, 11 minimum. Right? So we have to be here 7:45, the school day starts. You gotta get here. And then because, they're slow, you gotta give them lots of time to get ready, right? So what time do they have to go to bed at night if they're going to get that sleep? 6:30. Yeah. So usually when I say that, half the parents go, yes! And half the parents go, no way! because it's hard, right? Our culture doesn't really support what's best for the brain development. So for us to make these changes, it's like a radical act. It's like we're going against what our culture is telling us to do. Yes.
It's 2 hours.
Yes. Yes. I think that society needs to make some changes. But as the research comes out, as people start to learn, I'm optimistic that those changes will start to happen to make it a more sane daily schedule. They do fall asleep in the day.
Because then when they fall asleep on the bus, trying to get them back to sleep.
It can be tricky. Yeah. In your packets that I gave you, there's more information about sleep, there's more information about exercise, and there's some tips and resources you can look to. So if you have more questions, look further. There's tons of great stuff you can find. All right. One other thing I'm going to talk to you about is executive functions. Have you heard of executive functions? This happens in the front part of your brain, and it's what allows you to make decisions, to plan, to think ahead, long-term goals. It also is involved in helping you to inhibit bad decisions. So like, I'm not going to eat the fifth cookie, right? That's good executive function, inhibiting a bad choice. I'm not going to yell at my boss, even though he's wrong, right? That's your executive function kicking in, inhibiting a bad choice. So they tested the executive function of 5-year-olds, and they gave them one of 3 things to do for 10 minutes, and then they gave them these tests. They could either draw for 10 minutes, like you're doing. That's the blue lines. They could watch Caillou for 10 minutes. That's the red line. Or they could watch SpongeBob for 10 minutes. That's the green line. Okay, so normally, if a 5-year-old off the street, just without doing these things, took the test, they'd get right in the middle. That would be the expected score. So what happened? The kids who were drawn did way better on all 4 tests of executive function. The kids who were watching Caillou, a little better, a little worse, kind of a mixed bag, right? Kids who were watching SpongeBob, way worse on all 4 measures of executive function. So what does this mean? Why does it happen? Is it because it's a talking sponge, right? They think it's because it's so fast-paced. So you've seen SpongeBob, like change, right? So think about it. We've got this web, this, crazy jungle of connections to get through. The child's watching, and they just get here, and boom, it changes, they're back here. Watching, boom, it changes, they're back here. Watching, boom, it changes, they're back here. They never get all the way across, right? And it's practice that makes permanent. So if they don't get all the way across, they don't get long connections. And we need long connections. Every part of the brain connecting every other part of the brain, right? They did studies of children with high impulsivities, teenagers in juvenile delinquent facilities. They had short connections, as if they were much younger. This is how important long connections are. This is how important it is to not interrupt, not have an environment that's constantly interrupting you. All right, so I've terrified you. They're watching, they're not getting enough sleep, we're yelling at them, they're not doing enough around the house, right? Not getting enough exercise, they're watching TV, their brains are doomed. Don't worry, the brain is very resilient, they call that plasticity. It can change and overcome, especially before the age of 6. It's the most flexible time for the brain to learn. So whatever we can do now will have tremendous benefits for the child for the rest of their life as adults. That makes sense, right? When you see that. Okay. So do what you can. They say start with the lowest hanging fruit. Like maybe the first thing you can tackle is sleep, and maybe exercise. Reading together every day is, of course, really important. And having that pause time, that wait time when you're reading. Counting when you're in the car and they say, Mom, I want to play Angry Birds. Give me your phone. Say, no, let's count, the trees. Let's count the streetlights. Let's play the 20 questions, things like that. And if you're just too tired, let's just put on some classical music so I can have some quiet. So anything that you can do, start with what you can do, and it'll make a huge difference. It'll be huge benefits. I'll leave you with a little inspiration. So this Montessori method, in the morning, we have a mixed age group, 3-year-olds all the way through 6-year-olds, okay? And that helps the children help each other. They're so actively learning all day long. We learn better from peers than we do from adults, right? We all know that. So in the classroom, there's a lot of peer teaching. And they have 2.5 hours of uninterrupted time to work on their individual lessons, to repeat the lessons that they've been given, right, at their own pace. So they have the time they need to get through it. So the Montessori method really supports that brain development in the earlier. It's fantastic. I'll give you a few examples of some success stories, some Montessori success stories. So I'll start here. All these people have come through Montessori education. So you've got Nina, the opera singer. He did he. Joshua Bell at the violin. Julia Child, one of my favorites. Helen Hunt, George Clooney, all Montessori. So the arts, right? But then, the guys who founded Google, the guy who founded Amazon, the guy who created The Sims, the editor of the Washington Post forever, Catherine Graham, the Prince's Children, Anne Frank, right? Montessori student, the president sent his out to Montessori. These are some of the people who come out. And so you can see there's all types of gifts that are nurtured, because every human has strengths and gifts to offer. So we really try to develop them in all the ways, not just in the traditional ways. So thank you for coming. Do you guys have